Good morning, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Dr. David Harasti, and I'm presenting to you today because last year I was quite fortunate to win the Early Career Award for ASFB. So today I'm going to be having the joy of telling you all about seahorses and all the research that I've been fortunate to do for the past 15 years. So seahorse numbers are declining, and I want to focus on about why they're declining and what can we do about it. Worldwide at the moment, there's about 45 different species of seahorses. The recent seahorses that were described were pygmy seahorses, Hippocampus japygyu, a Japanese pig seahorse, pygmy pig seahorse from Japan, and Hippocampus nalu from South Africa were the two most recent ones, and I was involved in the describing of both those species. Now, I've always been fascinated by seahorses. I had my first seahorse encounter in 1997, just not far from my home at Nelson Bay at a site called Fly Point, and ever since I first saw one, I've always had a great interest in them. Now, of our 45 species of seahorses, 14 of them are listed as threatened species on the IUCN Red List. This basically means that these species will go extinct in the wild unless conservation management actions are implemented to reverse their decline. There's 2 species listed as endangered, a couple as vulnerable, but most seahorse species are actually listed as data deficient, meaning we don't have enough information to do an assessment on them. Now, the major causes of their decline are 3 things. It's overfishing, it's taken as bycatch in the trawl fisheries, and it's declining habitat loss. Now, the overfishing is brought about by the fact that seahorses are really popular and important for traditional Chinese medicine. They use them in medicinal reasons for helping recurring respiratory problems, liver condition, and even helping solve male impotence. Now, the constant take of these seahorses, particularly through the Asian countries, has caused massive declines of them. They're also taken for aquariums, and they're also sold as curios, so you can buy a seahorse dangling on a chain, which would have been a seahorse taken from the wild. And it's estimated over a year, 37 million seahorses are taken as bycatch. Now, fortunately in Australia, seahorses are protected under the Commonwealth EPBC Act. They are listed and protected species for all Commonwealth waters. And fortunately in New South Wales in 2004, they became completely protected, meaning it's illegal to take, possess, or harm a seahorse in the wild in New South Wales waters. More recently, in April 2020, the white seahorse, which is the focus of my PhD, it became listed as an endangered species under New South Wales Fisheries Management Act. And this is the highest level of protection that can be provided for a species in New South Wales. A bit about the white seahorse is that it's an endemic species to the east coast of Australia. It's found only occurring in estuaries and coastal embayments. It likes these shallow protected waterways, and it's normally not found any deeper than 13 metres. This species has a very strong side attachment. It does not move. It finds its happy place and pretty much stays there, and has a very small home range. It's a medium-sized seahorse. It grows to a maximum size of about 16 centimetres. And interestingly, in my research over numerous years, I showed that they're monogamous over breeding seasons. So we had a couple of pairs that they bred together for over 3 breeding seasons in a row. So one of the few seahorse species that actually can fall in love. And they also live quite long for a seahorse, much longer than what we thought. And I've got a paper in press at the moment showing that seahorses can live for over 7 years in the wild. So what's caused the white seahorse to decline? It's also known as the Sydney seahorse. And as you know, Sydney Harbour, very overdeveloped. A lot of marine habitats have been lost there. Seahorses rely on marine habitats to survive. So they need the mangroves, they need the seagrasses, they need the coral reefs. Unfortunately, many of these habitats are threatened by human activities, such as land reclamation, coastal developments, and particularly things like trawling over habitats is definitely not good. So this has caused seahorses, not just white seahorses, but seahorses all around the world to decline in abundance. Now, the white seahorse shows strong habitat preferences. Did a preference study here in Port Stephens, showed that adult seahorses really like to live in the sponges and the Posidonia seagrass. And they also had a really strong preference for this soft coral, Dendronethia australis. This cauliflower coral grows up to about 50 centimetres in height, and you could find football fields of them in Port Stephens. It used to be an amazing dive where you could swim through a field of soft corals, and the seahorses would be hiding in amongst the branches. Now, the adults would like to hang out in these areas where the soft corals and the sponges would be present, and if you look closely in this photo, you can see a seahorse hiding. They are the masters of camouflage. They're the slowest moving fish in the ocean, so hence they need camouflage for survival. And a seahorse hiding can be seen just here. So as you can see, that they're very good at blending into their surrounds. Now the juveniles in Port Stephens, they actually have a strong preference for this yellow Gorgonian fan, a Euplexaurus species. And what I found is that the juveniles would change their colours very quickly to match their host. So the seahorse hiding in this photo is quite difficult to see because its colours blending in. There you go. And this colour change can happen quite rapidly, within a day or two. So what happens when the habitats of white seahorse are destroyed? I implemented a study in Port Stephens, which I published in 2016, but looked at the declining numbers of seahorses at two sites, known as the Pipeline and the Seahorse Gardens. Now, these two sites are subject to a range of impacts, but the three main impacts are anchoring of boats, moorings, and inundation from sand. Now, these three combined can have devastating effects on the marine scape. Here's a summer's day down at the Seahorse Garden site, and it wouldn't be uncommon to see 10 to 15 boats anchored in where all these sensitive marine habitats would occur. Not only that, but we had some moorings installed, which are meant to be environmentally friendly. Environmentally friendly moorings don't scour the seafloor. These moorings are installed as environmentally friendly, and clearly you can see that they were not. So what happened, basically every time the mooring moved around, it scoured the seafloor and it removed all the soft corals. Now, scours from mooring can cause great damage. All you need to do is go look at a Google photo of Lake Macquarie or Sydney Harbour, and you just see Swiss cheese holes all through the seagrass. One swing mooring can destroy up to 700 metres square seagrass, and the studies shown by Tim Glasby and Greg West. Now, the soft corals are very sensitive to disturbance. They're shallow rooted. Their roots for the soft corals only go maybe 2 to 3 centimetres below the sand. So if an anchor comes through or a mooring swings around, it's just going to uproot them. They shrivel up and they die. So here you can see the effects of some moorings and a major boat, high-use boat anchoring area. The hatched areas from 2011, then I resurveyed the sites in 2015, and you can see that there's significant declines in the soft coral that occurred at these sites. One of the other main causes of the decline in Port Stephens was inundation from sand. So we had a couple of big East Coast low events in 2010, 2011, and they pushed a lot of sand into Port Stephens. And this is one of my reference sites. And you can see this is April, and compared to a month later in May, you can see that the sand had come through and smothered over all those soft corals. Unfortunately, soft corals, they don't have the ability to swim up and move away, and they just basically get buried, and that's the end of their life. Now, what happens to the seahorse abundance when the habitats disappear? Fortunately, I had some good long-term monitoring data at these sites. I'd surveyed them monthly from 2006 to 2009 as part of my PhD. So the last surveys in 2009, I had pretty good abundances between 200 to 300 at the two sites. But when I went back in 2014, 2015, you can see the abundance had significantly declined. This is linked to the disappearance of the habitats that they require. And to summarise how bad it was, the Seahorse Gardens, the seahorses disappeared by 97%, which was linked to the soft corals, which was also 95%. Sponge habitats were down. Pipeline, very similar. Seahorses declined by 83%. Sponges by 73%, soft corals by 73%, and the sponges had also declined a bit as well. So unfortunately, about the habitats, the seahorse abundance is going to be greatly affected, and it's very simple. If you lose the habitats, you lose the seahorses. So these areas where seahorse habitats have disappeared, there's no more sponges, there's no more seagrass, we need to come up with ideas to encourage seahorses back if the natural habitats aren't there. So this is where I came up with the idea of these artificial habitat units and calling them seahorse hotels. It's a concept that came about in 2015, and the way I came up with it was pretty simple. I do a lot of diving. I'd find old lobster or old fish traps discarded on the seafloor that were lost behind. And over time, these old traps became living marine ecosystems. They'd be covered in sponges, they'd be covered in growth, and fish and seahorses would eventually move on to them. So here's a trap that was lost for about 3 years. 3 years later, this is what it had turned into. So you can see all the sponges growing all over it. And here's another example of a trap that was lost. So my idea was I wanted to replicate this with purposely designed seahorse hotels, which would get full of growth and therefore encourage seahorses to move on to them, because seahorses require that growth to hide. They need camouflage. So in 2018, 2019, we implemented a trial, a pilot study here in Port Stephens. And this was part of a project with Dr. Michael Simpson from the University of Sydney, part of his PhD. And we installed 18 seahorse hotels into 2 sites at Port Stephens to see if they had the ability to attract seahorses to them. So this is what they look like. These are the seahorse hotels. 1 metre by 1 metre wide, about 50 centimetre high. These ones we constructed out of an aluminium frame, and we covered them in chicken mesh, and we just weighted them down with a couple of house bricks. Very cheap. So the materials for each hotel is only about $10 for this, for example. So they weren't costly to build. Unfortunately, we did learn that using aluminium wasn't the best idea. Aluminium breaks down in the marine environment very quickly. So after 12 months, there wasn't really much left of these seahorse hotels. They broke down much faster than we thought. The other thing we do to these hotels, some you can see have sticks in the middle and bits of dowel. Some are open, like this one here. We test to see if you added complexity inside the hotel, such as bits of dowel or bits of rope, if it would help attract seahorses. Within 6 months, we had 63 different animals living on the seahorse hotels. Even when the study finished, we still had animals on the hotels, the collapsed hotels, after 18 months. And what we found in the paper we published and summarised is adding that additional complexity in the design of the aluminium hotels wasn't that necessary. We basically found that the seahorses like to cling to the outside of the hotel frame. They just like clinging onto the chicken wire. Here's one of the collapsed hotels 18 months after installation. So nothing really left of it, just a bit of the frame, covered in marine algae and sponges and bryozoans. And if you look carefully here, you can see 2 of the seahorses that were originally found. They moved on to the hotels 3 months after installation, and we tagged them. So they're still living on there. There they are there. At the end of the day, this is what I'm hoping will happen. These seahorse hotels, this is an old trap, will get covered in so much marine growth, they'll collapse, and it'll basically just look like it's always been part of the natural environment. And in the words of the famous American philosopher, Kevin Costner in Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will come. So just recently, I thought I'd try something different. All around the world, people are starting to install seahorse hotels, but some communities don't have the resources to do it. So I'm looking at simpler methods to attract seahorses. So I tried this. I took a couple of garden cuttings from the garden, small twigs, 30, 40 centimeters in length, and I pushed them into the sand where seahorses used to occur. Within 4 days, I had my first seahorse move on to them. He was later joined by a female seahorse, and they lived on these sticks for 3 months where they bred together. So it could be something as simple as putting sticks in the sand, which I'm going to call seahorse poles, so they can dance and hang around and twirl around, etc., get all excited. It might be as simple as just poles in the sand that attract these seahorses to help recover their populations. Moving on from habitat restoration is another program we've just started, which is a conservation stocking program. This is the world first that we're trialling. It's only a pilot study where we're looking to see if it's viable to raise baby seahorses in captivity and then release them back into the wild. So a collaboration with Sea Life Aquarium and UTS, we collected 10 adults from Clifton Gardens in Sydney Harbour in October last year, and we moved them into Sea Life Aquarium where they gave birth to numerous babies. And we have a master student, B. Kyle, who's going to be monitoring the survival of these juveniles. So if you go into Sea Life Aquarium in Sydney, you'll see this new display, and it's all about the endangered seahorse, and we're helping raise the profile of it. We want to try and generate some local stewardship for the seahorse in Sydney Harbour, so people will tend to look after their marine environment a bit more. Now, in captivity, a male seahorse can give birth to 50 to 150 animals, babies at a time. And he can also do that, 6 to 7 times over a breeding season. So that would mean a male seahorse should have 700 babies in the ocean each season, which means that the ocean would be overrun by baby seahorses, which would be totally wonderful. But that's not the case. Now, the reason for that is that when baby seahorses are born, they're not very big, around 6 to 8 millimeters in length. When they pop out of the male's pouch, they basically are coming out like underwater chocolate Maltesers. They're small, they're crunchy, and they're delicious. And fish will just smash them. As soon as a male seahorse comes and gives birth, you'll have snapper come in, leather jackets come in, and I'll just woof all the babies up. So the survival rate of a baby seahorse, unfortunately, is not very high. I'd say less than 5%, probably around 1%. So the idea is if we raise them in captivity and get them to a certain size, they should be able to fend for themselves. They'll be able to hide better, they'll be able to feed better. So of our babies in a captivity, before we release them back into the wild, we have to tag them. And we tag them using injection, a dye injection, known as elastomer. Now, VIFE is really good for seahorses. We give every seahorse 3 tags. 3 tags means that that animal can be uniquely identified by placing those tags into different parts of the seahorse's body. So, animal on the left there, it's got 3 red tags in position 5. So that's R5, R5, R5. The gold seahorse on the right has 2 orange tags in position 2 and 1 tag in position 3. So that female's O2, O2, O3. So I can identify every seahorse basically based on where those marks are. Now, we did this in aquarium. We tagged them in aquarium prior to release. And if you look at elastomer tags under a UV light, they're actually fluorescent, which makes them easy to see. In the wild though, they don't glow like that. They're actually quite difficult to see. So on the juveniles, we take down a blue UV light to try and find them. So here's a couple of babies that were released into the wild. You can see a couple of tags here, 1 green one there, and a couple of red ones here. So these animals can be identified, which means we can actually monitor their growth and their survival. We released 95 babies into Clifton Gardens in April this year. We put 45 babies onto the hotels and we put 40 onto the swimming net. The ones that went onto the hotels had red elastomer tags, and the ones that we put onto the swimming net, which is only about 20 meters away, they had green tags. So part of the experiment was to look at, is survival better on the hotels or is survival better on the existing net that's already in place? Now, the idea of them being tagged as well, we can also see their movements. We're going to see if they actually change their habitat types. Did they prefer to stay on the hotels or did they want to swim across to the swimming net and live on there instead? These seahorses are now being monitored by B. Kyle as part of her masters. And she's seeing these juveniles that were released quite regularly. So 6 months after, the other day she found 20 of them again. She's had up to 40. So they're still hanging around, but they're very good at hiding, especially inside the seahorse hotels. They get inside the hotels and we design these ones so predators can't get in. So not only can the predators not get in to eat them, we can't get in there to pull them out and see what their tag IDs are. They're very clever. So here's 3 of the baby seahorses a couple of days after release, living on one of the hotels. And you can clearly see the elastomer tags on these seahorses. So we're going to monitor these seahorses over the next 12 to 18 months. And what we're hoping to see is a good survival rate. I'd say anything over 20% survival rate would be a huge success. We're going to monitor their growth and compare how the growth rates go compared to what's previously recorded for the species in the wild. And what I'm really interested to see is if they start these captive bred animals start breeding in the wild, because that would be very successful if they start interacting and breeding with the wild animals. So in the future, there's more artificial habitats planned. Councils are now using seahorse hotels as remediation projects. When they have to clean nets or remove jetties, they put down hotels and move the seahorses onto them, which is a good outcome. And maybe in the future, we might do some more conservation stocking trials to see if it's a viable option for the species in the future. So stay tuned on that one. And I'll finish it off there. If anyone has any questions, feel free to ask away now. Oh, and if you ever want to follow what I do in Seahorse World, log into my Twitter, and there's plenty of stories about Dawn the Seahorse and all her travels.